Joining us now is Cara Crabb-Burnham. She's the founder of CCB Consulting. She's been joining us over the last few weeks to talk about the state of the cannabis industry in Massachusetts and across New England. Cara, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back, Mike.
So we spent the last few weeks talking a little bit about the state of the industry, state of regulation, how it works. I'd like to get into sort of the business side of this because ultimately that's the opportunity here, at least in Massachusetts, is for-profit businesses to start recreational, medical, and different types of facilities. So maybe you can get in there. Let's say I'm a complete new startup. I don't have the space yet. I don't have a permit. What am I looking at, when all is said and done, start to finish for my startup costs between application fees, acquiring an actual facility, and applying for, local licensure?
Well, it's entirely dependent on which license type you would like to achieve.
Let's go with recreational. Let's start there because, yeah, you're right. It probably varies.
There are 9 different kinds of licenses that you can get for recreational.
Of course there are. Of course there
are. So if for the least expensive way to participate in the industry is to not get a license, but to develop a brand and partner with somebody who already has a facility and enter the market that way, you lose a lot of the overhead, but it's the most efficient way to get a product onto shelves. There's delivery companies, courier companies, and transport companies. The first 2 license types are social equity at the moment. Transportation companies are moving cannabis between licensed facilities, so their most expensive bits of overhead are labor, because it's 2 drivers per vehicle at all times. And the vehicles themselves have to be outfit in very specific ways, so the vehicles end up being a little bit more expensive. If you're looking at a brick-and-mortar store, it's probably the least expensive physical location to start up. You spend a good chunk at the beginning getting the store built out, but it's aside from the expensive security requirements by compliance, it'll be your less expensive license type. Okay. And then it becomes much more expensive when you start building a facility for production or cultivation. Yeah. At that point, you're looking at about between $300 and now, it's $500 a square foot, wow. Depending on how you're building, what technology you want to put in. But if you're looking for a cultivation facility, the smallest viable product being 5,000 square feet, I would anticipate spending a minimum of $8 million.
Wow. Cara,
from start to first dollar.
So, there are not a whole lot of investors sitting there with $8 million to go put into a facility. How are these being funded, and I imagine there are some pretty specific rules about, investments in these types of facilities and who can do so, what the capital requirements are. Does every investor need to be approved by the commission? How are people actually starting these things up, given the intense capital costs?
So if you are, it depends on your level of control. So you can be an investor with no control over the company and just have a debt agreement of some sort. But anybody who owns more than 9.9% of any license type has to be included in the approvals process by the Cannabis Control Commission. So that means you have to submit bank information, your background checks, fingerprints. They do a full background check through a company called CSI. I got mine back. It's and I'm not even that interesting of a person, but my background check came back for agent registration, and it was 3/4 of an inch thick of printouts. Yep.
What car you drove when you were 16 years old? Those things get pretty intense.
I got red flagged for sharing something on social media that was about the Cannabis Control Commission. The background check red flagged that as a post about drugs. But it was literally the announcement
in an application to apply for a drug license. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
How about regional? what you were describing here in terms of startup costs, pretty significant amount of them seem to be related to specific regulations that are in place, presumably in Massachusetts. Are you seeing these costs vary state by state, or is what's the case in Massachusetts pretty consistent across every other state as well?
Oh, no. That's very different. Massachusetts is we're fundamentally we're pilgrims. We love regulation and rules to follow. So our licenses and our expectations are relatively rigorous compared to other states like Maine or Vermont. I think 90% of Vermont's market right now is 1,000 square feet or smaller cultivation facilities, outdoor cultivation facilities even. So that's just totally different than the majority of the cannabis facilities in Massachusetts that are 20,000 square feet or more indoor facilities. So it's much less expensive to to get one of these businesses off the ground in Maine or Vermont right now. Connecticut, on the other hand, you have to be a pharmaceutical. You have to work you have to be a licensed pharmacy technician, and you have to have. There's only 4 operators right now in Connecticut, selling to, I think it's 20-something retail stores at this point. So that's going to be a very, very expensive license to get into. So yeah, it absolutely varies by state, and the states with the less rigorous compliance requirements are less expensive. I think one of the most surprising requirements or expenses that new people that coming into the space find is security. I got a client in Lowell with a 5,000 square foot grow, and which means there's approximately 17,000 square feet of facility, and we're talking $160,000 security bill. I mean, door strike.
So obviously, operating costs, are going to be high here, and there's high human costs. To be forget about being an investor, to just be an employee in any of these facilities. I mean, how does it compare to the application process and types of requirements that would be needed for another non-cannabis type of retail job? Right? If I'm just working the counter in a retail facility, what sort of requirements do I have on me?
Well, there's a handful of things that would prevent you from applying, or the company would have to apply for a waiver. But the employee themselves doesn't have to do too terribly much. The company finds interviews somebody that they like. They run a query. They get permission to run a query check, a background check, criminal records check on the employee. If nothing comes up, then they submit the application to the CCC with the person's information, and then we all move on, and we get you start working after you get your agent card. So no, the employee themselves doesn't actually have a whole lot of responsibility. However, if you've been caught selling cannabis to minors or violent assault charges, there's a handful of charges that will preclude you from working in the space.
That doesn't seem all that far off. Cara Crabb-Burnham from CCB Consulting. She's the founder of CCB Consulting. Has been joining us the last few weeks to talk about the state of the cannabis industry.